Everyone wants awakening to be beautiful. They picture bliss, serenity, some golden state of perfection. But the truth is, awakening is brutal. It rips the ground out from under you. It feels less like finding heaven and more like losing your mind. You won't recognize yourself. You'll wonder if you're dying. And in a sense you are. Because what's waking up is not the self you've been protecting all these years, but the self that's been buried beneath it. And here lies the delightful trick of it all. The moment you awaken, the world you trusted collapses. You see how much of life was built on illusions, rules, beliefs, ambitions, even relationships. What once felt solid now looks paper thin. It's as if everything is upside down. You begin the painful work of unlearning, shedding lies you didn't even know you were living. And yet in that empty space, you don't feel free. You feel lost. You walk into rooms and feel like a stranger. Even among those you love, you laugh and realize it's hollow. You'll ache with a disconnection so sharp it feels like exile. Awakening doesn't hand you belonging. First it strips it away. And so you ask, if I can no longer stand on the old ground, but I have no new ground yet, where am I supposed to stand? The shattering, the first stage of awakening doesn't arrive gently. It does not whisper in your ear or come to you in meditation. It comes as a storm. It tears apart the life you thought was yours. It feels like failure. It feels like punishment. It feels like life itself has turned against you. It doesn't feel spiritual at all. One day, you believe you are somebody, defined by your achievements, your talents, your plans. You've built an image, and the world seems to recognize it. Then suddenly the storm comes, it all collapses. The partner you leaned on leaves. The career you spent years building crumbles. The money vanishes. Your health betrays you. Sometimes life takes one piece, sometimes it takes them all. Imagine a surgeon who loses his hands. The one thing he used to prove his existence is gone. Suddenly there is nothing left to prop him up. With them he built his career, his pride, his sense of self. And then, in a single accident, they are gone. If you take his wealth, he can earn it back. If you take his lover, he may find another. But take away the one thing he staked his very existence on, and he cannot even lift a cup of coffee. Who is he now? Nothing of the old image remains. And what's left? A naked truth you don't want to face. Without all those props, you are not the somebody you thought you were. You feel small, weak, powerless. You look in the mirror and see not a master of life, but a frightened human being. The image you spent years building shatters, and in its place stands only pain. This is the bottom. This is the suffering stage. The stage where you discover, not in theory but in pain, that you are not invincible. You are small. You are breakable. Here the ego does not surrender willingly. It fights. It rages. It clings. You will try to climb back, to rebuild the relationship, to get the career back on track, to force life to return to what it was. But the harder you fight, the worse it gets. Every attempt to glue the mask back together only makes it fall apart faster. That is why this stage is so terrifying. For the first stage of awakening is not about insight, it is about loss. Life strips you bare, and only in that unbearable emptiness can the journey begin. Before a human being can surrender to life, they must first be broken by it. If the first stage rips the ground from beneath you, the second stage keeps you there. This is the dark night. It doesn't last a day, it lingers for months, years, even decades. It is the long purgatory where the ego fights for its life. This phase is characterized by intense questioning, confusion, and the deconstruction of old beliefs. You see now that the world you trusted was built on lies, but knowing this doesn't set you free. You feel as if your entire existence has been a cruel joke. What you studied, what you worked for, what you loved, suddenly it all looks false, upside down. Nothing feels solid, nothing feels true. And here begins the real torture. You try to live by the truth you've glimpsed, but the ego won't allow it. You practice letting go, and then you fall back. You catch yourself clinging, performing, chasing again. Again and again you fail. Each time you suffer more, because you know you're trapped in the very illusion you've already seen through. This is why it is called a night. Not because it is brief, but because it feels endless. You wander through years of confusion, rejection, loneliness. You cannot return to who you were, and yet you cannot yet stand in who you are becoming. This is the crucifixion of the ego. A long dying, stretched out over time, and no one passes through it without being broken again and again. When the old foundations fall away, the mind naturally begins to search. You cannot go back to what you once believed, and yet you cannot remain in the void. So you seek, you explore. You turn to books, teachers, philosophies, religions, psychology, anything that might restore some sense of meaning. This is the stage of seeking. And at first it seems like you are gathering fragments from many different places. One tradition says this, another says that. A mystic speaks of union. A physicist speaks of energy. A psychologist speaks of the unconscious. On the surface they look separate, contradictory even. But if you stay with it long enough, you begin to notice a curious pattern. No matter where you look, they are all pointing in the same direction. The names differ, the metaphors change, but beneath them all is a single truth. That there is no separation. That the self you imagine to be a lonely, isolated ego is inseparable from the whole fabric of existence. Whether it is spoken of as God, Tao, Brahman, the universe, or simply life itself, the essence is the same. So the search is not endless wandering. It is more like climbing a mountain from many sides. The paths are different, the scenery changes, but the higher you go, the clearer it becomes that they all converge at the same summit, oneness. And this realization transforms the very meaning of seeking. You discover that what you were searching for out there was never separate from what you are in here. The seeker and the sought were never two. The end of the search is not the finding of an object, but the recognition of a truth that has always been the case. You are already part of the whole. Once you begin to glimpse the underlying unity of things, the world itself changes in appearance. It is as if you have been given a new set of eyes. What once looked ordinary now appears extraordinary. The universe is no longer a hostile accident, indifferent to your existence. It begins to feel like a vast, intelligent dance, in which you are a participant rather than a stranger. This is the stage called awareness. At this stage, you notice abundance, where you once saw only lack. Opportunities seem to present themselves not as rare prizes, but as natural expressions of life unfolding. You also begin to look at people differently. Instead of reducing them to their mistakes, you recognize the hurt that lies behind their behavior. A person who lashes out is not evil at their core. They are wounded, protecting themselves in the only way they know. This shift is not naive optimism, it is clarity. But when you separate who people truly are from the masks they wear, compassion arises naturally. And in that same light, you begin to see your own nature more honestly. You recognize the ways you have betrayed yourself. But you also discover the strength and goodness that were always there. This stage is deeply inspiring because it reveals that both you and the world are far more whole than you ever imagined. When awareness deepens, something irreversible occurs. You begin to change, not because you force yourself to, but because the old ways of being no longer make sense. You can't unknow what you now see, and you can't return to the smaller self you once believed yourself to be. This is the stage of transformation. It feels like shedding a skin. Perhaps you notice that arguments which once consumed you no longer hold the same charge. You may catch yourself in the middle of a reaction, defending, proving, blaming, and suddenly see it for what it is. Instead of being swept away, you step back, breathe, and choose differently. Where you once felt the need to control every outcome, you now sense the freedom of allowing life to unfold. True transformation does not happen when life is comfortable. It begins when you face the parts of yourself you've spent years avoiding. The disappointments, the betrayals, the nights you cried alone, the shame you buried, the mistakes you swore you'd never forgive yourself for. These are the raw materials of awakening. It can show up in simple ways. A conversation with a parent that would have triggered guilt now becomes an opportunity to listen without taking everything personally. A change at work no longer defines your worth. It simply redirects your path. Even moments of waiting in traffic shift from irritation into a surprising sense of peace. And out of this shedding comes rebirth. A new sense of self emerges, not the fragile ego struggling for recognition. Be a deeper self that feels rooted, alive, and authentic. Relationships change, priorities realign, and you discover that life moves more like a current to join than a battle to win. You find that your actions are guided less by fear and more by trust. This rebirth is not about becoming someone else. It is about remembering who you truly are. It is the beginning of living in alignment with what you have discovered, that you are not a fragment battling against the universe, but an expression of the universe itself. And when that becomes more than an idea, when it is lived and breathed, life takes on a quality that feels both entirely new and profoundly natural. And from that recognition that you are not a fragment battling against the universe, but an expression of it, comes a profound shift in perception. You begin to feel the threads of connection everywhere. What once appeared separate now reveals itself as part of a larger fabric. The people you meet, the challenges you face, even the smallest coincidences, suddenly they are not happening to you, they are happening for you. This is the stage when you can feel the connection between yourself and the universe. This is what many call synchronicity. Life begins to show a kind of hidden order, a rhythm that unfolds with uncanny precision. A book falls into your hands at just the right moment. A stranger speaks the very words you needed to hear. An apparent setback opens the door to an unexpected opportunity. These events may look like accidents from the outside, but from within they feel like guidance. And here the sense of isolation dissolves. You recognize that you are not wandering through a meaningless chaos, but participating in a living tapestry where every thread is connected. Your individuality is not lost in this discovery. Just as a wave remains a wave while belonging to the ocean, you remain uniquely yourself while inseparable from the whole. As this awareness deepens, you see that you are not only connected, you are also being led, protected, and provided for at every step. The same intelligence that moves the stars is moving you. And once you begin to trust that, fear loses its grip, because you finally know you are never abandoned, never separate, always held within something immeasurable. You realize you no longer need protection from life, because you are life. And more than that, you love life. Every rise, every fall, every joy, every sorrow, each is part of the same current carrying you forward. This is the final stage of awakening, the great awakening of self. You no longer live as a fragile ego guarding its little corner of existence. Instead, you live as the awareness behind it all, open, present, unafraid. Surrender comes naturally here, not as resignation, but as alignment. You stop fighting the river and discover that it has been carrying you all along. Choices that once felt paralyzing become clear, not because you weigh every risk, but because you trust the deeper movement guiding you. And with this awakening comes oneness. You look at others and no longer see strangers. You see yourself reflected in their eyes, their struggles, their hopes. You recognize that the same life breathing in you is breathing in them. To awaken in this way is to come home to the truth that you are and always have been whole. You return to your original nature, fearless, innocent, full of wisdom and possibility, radiant with love. Very few walk this path to its depths, for it requires devotion. It asks that you want awakening more than comfort, more than certainty. It takes patience, courage, and time, but when it blossoms, it is not